The whole room laughed when I walked in. The auctioneer had announced me with the polite indifference of a man reading the weight of a bag of grain. Healer's apprentice. Plain. Unbonded. Unranked. Property of the Sable Temple. Transferred for outstanding debt to the auction house of the Glassmere provinces. I had been told to walk to the centre of the floor, to turn once, and to keep my eyes lowered. I did the first two. I did not do the third. I had been told also to expect the laughter. Plain Omegas always drew laughter at the spring auction. The Glassmere men came here to buy mates with curves and hair and colour, and I had none of those. I was 21 years old and underfed by a year and a half of temple grain, and I knew exactly what I looked like in the bidding lights. I had put my own hair up that morning. I had not bothered to soften it. The room laughed. The beater of the Iron Reach was leaning against the railing of the high gallery with his arms folded. I noticed him because the lamps were arranged to make the noble seats glow, and his armour caught the light in a way the merchant tables did not. He leaned over to the man beside him, said something I could not hear, and laughed too. The man beside him did not laugh. The man beside him stood up. He stood up so slowly that no one noticed at first. He was tall enough that his rising changed the geometry of the gallery, and the beater turned to him and started to say something, and then stopped saying it, because the Alpha King of the Iron Reach had gone the colour of struck bone and was no longer breathing. I watched him do it. I watched him not breathe. I watched the beater's smile fall off his face and the gallery go quiet in pieces, the way a forest goes quiet in pieces when something larger has walked in. The auctioneer cleared his throat and read the opening price, and the Alpha King of the Iron Reach, without looking away from me, and without taking the breath he had been refusing for I did not know how long, raised one finger and bid 4 times the opening sum. The room stopped laughing. I should explain something before this gets harder. I had been at the Sable Temple for 12 years. I had been brought in as a child, sole survivor of a border raid the priestesses spoke of only in hushed circles, and I had been given a clean shift and a bowl of broth, and a name that was not the one I came in with. The name I came in with had burned. The temple had given me Linnea, and I had answered to it for so long that I had nearly forgotten the other one. I was a healer's apprentice because I had a hand for it. I was an Omega because my body had told the temple healers so when I was 16. I was unbonded because the temple did not contract its own to outsiders unless coin demanded. This year, coin had demanded. I had walked the 3 days from the temple to the Glassmere auction house, with 2 priestesses and a boy who carried my pack. The head priestess had told me, with a kindness she did not often show me, that marriage was perhaps not for me. I had nodded. I had not expected the King of the Iron Reach to be at a Glassmere spring auction. The Iron Reach was 400 miles north. The Iron Reach had no commerce with the Glassmere provinces, and had not had any in living memory. There should not, by any rational accounting, have been an Alpha King in the gallery to bid on me at all. The auctioneer, who was a professional, recovered from the 4 times bid in 3 seconds. 400 crowns from the gentleman in the gallery. Do I hear? 500, said a woman's voice from the far balcony. I looked up. She was standing in the box reserved for the auction house family, Lady Vasher of Glassmere. I had been told her name on the way in. Her father owned the auction house, and she ran the floor. And she was beautiful in a way that cost a great deal of money to maintain. And she was looking at the Alpha King of the Iron Reach the way a hawk looks at another hawk. 600, the king said. 8, said Lady Vasher. 1,000, said the king. The room made a small sound. 1,000 crowns was the price of a noble war horse. 1,000 crowns was the price of a small parcel of useful land. 1,000 crowns was, by any sane measure, not what one paid for a plain omega out of a debt-bound temple. The room knew this. The room was trying to understand what it was watching. I knew what it was watching. I had watched him not breathe. He had recognized me. I did not know how. I had never set eyes on the Alpha King of the Iron Reach in my life, and yet he had stood up at the sight of me and stopped breathing, as if the air had been removed from the room. And Lady Vasher, who had not stopped paying attention, had decided that whatever was happening would not happen on her floor. 1,200, she said. 15, he said. He had not raised his voice. He had not looked at her. He had not, in fact, looked away from me since I had walked in. I felt the floor under my feet very precisely. I felt the weight of my hair gathered at the back of my neck. I felt the small iron pendant where it had always sat at the hollow of my throat, which I had worn since the temple gave it back to me when I was 9 years old, which I had been told had been around my neck the day they brought me in. The pendant was warm. I had not known it could be warm. Lady Vasher stopped at 2,000. The Alpha King bid 2,001. The auctioneer, who had run out of professional composure somewhere around 1400, took 2,001, going once, twice, and sold. I was led off the floor. I did not look back at the gallery. I would, I told myself, never look at the gallery again. I was wrong about that. The verification quarters of the Glassmere auction house were a stone wing on the eastern side of the property, where buyers were required to leave their purchases for 30 days while the auction house confirmed health, training, and contract validity. It was a courtesy designed to protect the houses against fraud. It was, Lady Vasher had explained to me with great warmth as I was led to my room, also a courtesy that bound my new owner to 30 days of physical separation. She had said the words new owner with a deliberate weight. The room she gave me was clean and small and had a single window facing the inner courtyard. I sat on the bed when she left and I held the iron pendant in my hand and I waited for it to cool. It did not cool. I had been in the room for an hour when I heard a man's voice in the corridor outside, low and angry and unmistakably accustomed to being obeyed. I went to the door and put my ear to the wood. I am not proud of this. I had been a healer's apprentice for 12 years, and I had been taught to respect closed doors. I did not respect this one. She does not leave this property until the contract clears. The contract clears tonight, my lady, with the King's seal. The contract clears in 30 days by the law of this house. He has paid 2,000 crowns, and he will wait 30 days for what he has paid for, like every other man who has bought from us. There was a silence. The silence had the quality of a man choosing not to break a piece of furniture. I want to see her, he said. You will see her in 30 days. Tonight. In 30 days. I heard him walk away. I heard her stay. I went back to the bed and I held the pendant in my closed hand because it was warm and because I had not understood until that moment that the Alpha King of the Iron Reach was on the other side of that door and that he had recognized me, and that whatever he had recognized was the reason a piece of iron I had worn for 12 years was beginning to wake up. He came that night anyway. Of course he did. He came not through the corridor, but through the inner courtyard, which I had been told no buyer was permitted to enter. I was at the window because I had not been able to make myself lie down, and I saw him in the moonlight before he saw me. He was the kind of tall that made the courtyard look smaller around him. He stopped under my window. He looked up. I opened the window. I should not have. The contract did not allow it. The auction house did not allow it. I opened it anyway because the pendant at my throat was hot enough to feel through the linen of my shift, and because I had questions. He looked up at me and he said, very quietly, "Show me your hand." I held out my left hand into the moonlight. He made a sound. It was not loud. It was the sound of a man absorbing a blow he had been bracing against for 12 years. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, he said, "There is a scar on the back of the wrist. 3 lines, made by a hot iron." I turned my wrist. There were 3 lines. They were old and silver, and I had been told when I was small that I had got them in the fire that took my family. I had stopped looking at them years ago. "Your name," he said, "is not Linnea." "No, my lord." "You do not remember the other one?" "No, my lord." "It was Eleanor," he said, "of the Sable March. You were 9 years old when I carried you out of a burning hall, and you would not let go of the iron mark of your house, and I cut the chain off a dead man's wrist and put it around your neck. I left you at a temple I trusted, because I was 16 years old and bleeding, and I had nowhere else to take you. I have been looking for the temple's records ever since." I had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of that. He said, "I did not find them. I am sorry." I held the iron pendant in my fist. I felt the heat of it against my palm. I thought about the head priestess of the Sable Temple, who had lit the fire I had been ladled out of, and who had been kind to me without ever once telling me my name had been something else. I thought about 12 years of being plain, of being an apprentice, of being a small white flower in dry country. I thought about a 16-year-old boy carrying a child out of smoke. "I do not remember you," I said. "No, my lord. Do not call me that. I do not know what else to call you." "Roderick." "Roderick," I said. The word felt like nothing. It felt like a stranger's name. I waited for it to feel like anything. It did not, yet. "Why did you bid?" He was silent for a moment. "Because the room laughed," he said, "and because my beater laughed, and because I knew, the moment they did, that I had spent 12 years looking for you, and that I had walked into a Glassmere auction house on a council errand, and my wolf had recognised you before my eyes did. And because, Eleanor of the Sable March, the woman in the gallery wanted you, and I was not going to leave you with her. She does not know who I am. She does not know what you are. I am a plain omega in a debt contract. You are the last living silver blood of the Sable March," he said, "and there are 3 rival packs who would slit each other's throats to own you, and the woman in that gallery is the daughter of one of them. I am not letting her have you." I sat down on the windowsill, because my legs were not going to keep me up. I did not know what a silver blood was. I knew the pendant at my throat was hot. If you have stayed with me this long, stay. I am about to tell you what a silver blood is, and what Lady Vasher did 3 nights later, and what the beater of the Iron Reach said to me when he finally understood what he had laughed at. There are 8 more nights of verification quarters to get through before I am out of that house. Tell me, before it gets harder, where you are listening from, and if her voice is the kind of voice you want to follow into the rest of this, stay with us. There is more. A silver blood, Roderick told me through the open window that first night, before he was driven off by the patrol, was a woman of the old healing lines. The Sable March had bred them for 9 generations. They were the only Lunars in living memory who had been able to mend a rejection wound, the scar an alpha left when he turned away a fated mate. They had been killed almost to extinction. 3 packs had wanted the bloodline gone. A 4th had wanted it for itself. The raid that took my family had not been a raid. It had been an assassination. I had been the only one carried out. He told me this in the 4 minutes he had before the patrol came around the corner. He told me he was not going to wait 30 days, that I was, as of 2001 crowns, the legal property of the Iron Reach, and that this was a circumstance he hated with a specific and personal fury. I told him, dryly, that he could not have hated it more than I did. He stopped at that. He looked up at me. He said, "No, I imagine I could not." He left. The patrol came. I closed the window. I sat on the bed, and I held the pendant in both hands, and I thought, with a clarity I had not felt in 12 years, that the head priestess had known. She had lit a fire I had been ladled out of, and given me a name that meant a small white flower, and kept me in a kitchen for 12 years, and sold me on a debt contract to an auction house she knew the daughter of one of the killing packs ran. Then I got up and I knocked on the door until a tired guard opened it, and I asked him, politely, for paper and a pen. I wrote 3 letters that night. I put them under my mattress. I did not tell Roderick about them. The second night, he did not come. The third night, Lady Vasher came. She came alone, which was the first thing that frightened me, and she came late, after the verification wing had been locked. And she came with a small leather case under her arm. She sat down in the chair by my bed. She put the case on her lap. She smiled the smile she had worn in the gallery. "You are an interesting purchase, Linnea." "Yes, my lady." "My father wishes to know what the Alpha King of the Iron Reach saw in you that the rest of us did not." "I would not know, my lady." She opened the case. Inside were 2 small glass vials, a clean cloth, and a thin steel lancet. "It is a blood test only," she said kindly. "We do this with all our high-value contracts, to verify provenance. It will not hurt you. I will do it myself." I knew what the test was for. The temple had taught me to recognize it. It was the test for silver blood, and the head priestess had told me when I was 12 years old that it had been outlawed in 3 provinces because the wrong result was a death sentence, and that I was never, under any circumstance, to allow it to be done on me. I understood now why. I said, "I would prefer not, my lady." "Your preferences do not enter into it." She reached for my wrist. I had been a healer's apprentice for 12 years. I knew where the small bones of the wrist were. I twisted my hand free, and I stood up off the bed, and I backed against the wall, and I said, "I will scream." "You will not." "I will. Loud. The Alpha King is in the buyer's house. He has paid for me. He will hear me before your guard does." She paused. She looked at me with something I could not read. "You are not as plain as I was told, are you?" "I am as plain as I have ever been, my lady. You knew what the test was for." I said nothing. "Interesting," she said, very softly, and she closed the case. She stood up. She put the case under her arm. She walked to the door. At the door, she turned. "You will not last 30 days here, Linnea. I want you to understand that. He paid for you, but he cannot reach you. There are 9 rooms in this wing, and you will go through 3 of them before the month is out. And by the time he is allowed to take you home, You will be a different woman than the one he bid for. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about how loud you can scream. She left. I did not sleep. I wrote a fourth letter. The fourth night, 2 of her men came in through the window. I had pulled the chair against the door. They came not through the door. They came up the courtyard wall, the way Roderick had come up to my window the first night. And they were over the sill before I had registered the noise, and one of them had his hand around my mouth before I had drawn breath to scream. I bit him. The pendant at my throat was burning. I do not know how else to describe it. It was burning, and the heat of it was not coming from the iron. It was coming from me. And the man with his hand on my mouth let go of me with a sound I had never heard a grown man make, and looked at his palm, which was beginning to blister. I drove my knee up into the second man, the way the temple kitchens had taught me when I was 15. I screamed. I screamed at the absolute top of my lungs, the way the temple had also taught me, on the very specific note that carries through stone. The Alpha King of the Iron Reach was, by his own later admission, in the courtyard. He was over the sill in less time than I would have believed possible for a man of his size. The first man, the one with the blistered palm, did not survive him. The second man, the one I had kneed, was thrown out the window into the courtyard, where the patrol that had finally come running discovered him with a broken collarbone and a contract that named Lady Vasher as his employer. Roderick stood in the middle of the room. He was shaking. I had never seen a man that size shake. He said, "Did they touch you?" He had his hand over my mouth. Anywhere else? No. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked at the pendant which was sitting on the linen of my shift and was, very faintly, glowing. "It woke up," he said. "Yes. That was you. The blistering." "I think so." "You have not been trained." "No. It is going to hurt you, Eleanor." "I know. It is going to try to come up too fast, and it is going to hurt you." "I know." I sat down on the bed. I put my hand over the pendant. The heat of it was bearable then, the way a banked fire is bearable. He sat down on the floor across the room from me, the way one sits down across from a frightened animal, and he did not move from there until the patrol arrived to take the second man away. When they were gone, he said, "I'm taking you home tonight." "The contract?" "Void. She sent men into a buyer's contracted property. The auction house will rule in my favour by morning. We are not waiting for morning. They will lose face. They have already lost face." "Roderick." He looked up. It was the first time I had used his name without a "my lord" in front of it. I watched it land. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Yes. I want to write a letter to the head priestess of the Sable Temple before we go." "Why?" "Because she knew. And I want her to know that I know." He nodded. "I will give you the time." I wrote the letter. It was short. It said only what needed saying. I sealed it. I put it on the table by the door. Then I let him take me out of the verification wing of the Glassmere auction house in his arms, because by then the heat of the pendant had spread up into my throat and down into my hands, and I could not, when it came to it, make my legs do what I asked them to. He carried me out through the courtyard. The patrol parted for him. The auction house guards did not move. Lady Vasher was not in the corridor. Lady Vasher, I learned later, had left for her father's estate an hour before, by horse, with a small leather case under her arm. She did not get there. The beater of the Iron Reach, who had laughed at me on the first day, was waiting at the gates with 12 men, and he had been given his orders, and he carried them out. The cost came 2 days later, after we had made it across the border into the Iron Reach, and I had been put in a bed in a stone fortress that smelled of pine and cold iron. The pendant had not stopped glowing. The heat had not stopped coming up through me. I had been awake for 30 hours, and I had begun to lose feeling in my hands. The healer of the Iron Reach, an old woman with no teeth and the worst bedside manner I had ever encountered in my profession, told me that the silver blood was trying to come up at the rate of 12 years, and that this was, in her opinion, going to kill me unless we burnt some of it off deliberately. I asked how. She said, the rejection bond. She said, you have not got one. You have not got a fated mate to bond to. We will have to make one. She looked, when she said this, very pointedly at Roderick, who was standing in the doorway with his arms folded and his face in the expression of a man who has been refusing to allow himself something for 36 hours and is running out of road. I said, he is not my fated mate. She said, he bid 2,000 crowns, child. His wolf has decided. You decide whether to let it happen. I looked at him. I had known him 3 days. I had known of him forever, in the way an orphan knows of the people who saved her. But I had known him as a man for 3 days, and I had been carried in his arms across a border, and I had asked him what to call him, and I had said his name without a title, and his wolf, the old healer was telling me, had decided. His wolf had been quieter than he was, since the gallery. I had noticed. I said, Roderick. Yes. Is your wolf decided? He took a long time to answer. He was, after all, the reluctant king. He was a man who had stopped breathing in a gallery and recognised me and bid 2,000 crowns and carried me 400 miles, and he was still, on principle, going to make me ask. Yes, Eleanor. And you? I am catching up. How fast? Not fast enough. Faster than I would like. I almost laughed. I would have if the cold from the silver blood had not just driven up into my jaw and locked it. I made the sound the laugh wanted to be instead. He crossed the room. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He did not touch me yet. He said, if I do this, you understand it cannot be undone. You will be Luna of the Iron Reach. You will be the most hunted woman in the southern provinces for the next year. 3 packs will send killers. The Glassmere auction house will be broken, and Vasha's father will declare a feud. I will spend the next 12 months keeping you alive. That is the offer. It is a poor offer, Roderick. It is the offer I have. And if I say no, then I take you to a holding 3 days from here, where my mother's people will hide you, and I do not see you again. That is also a poor offer. It is the second best one I have. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had been 16 years old in a burning hall, who had cut a chain off a dead man's wrist for a child he did not know, who had been looking for me for 12 years without knowing my name. I thought about the head priestess of the Sable Temple who had lit the fire and named me Linnea. I held out my left hand, the one with the 3 silver lines on the wrist, and I said, "Take it." He took it. The bond came up the way the silver blood had been coming up, only faster, and it took the heat out of me, and it took the cold with it, and I felt the seam in my body where the silver blood had been trying to surface knit itself into the seam of him. And I bit down on the inside of my cheek, and I did not look away from his face. He did not look away from mine. The old healer, who had seen worse things, watched without speaking. When it was done, I was shaking. My hands had gone white and were beginning to come back. The pendant at my throat was cool. He said, "Eleanor." "Yes?" "My wolf has stopped arguing with me." "Good. It says I am very late." 12 years late, Roderick." "Yes." "Make it up to me." He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh. It was a rough, surprised, slightly broken sound, the sound of a man who had not used the muscle in a long time, and I made a small private note that I was going to hear it again. The beater of the Iron Reach came to my chambers a week later, when I could stand without help. He was a large man, and he had a careful face, and he had already spent the week not looking at me directly. He came in and he stood in the doorway. He did not sit down. He said, "Luna." "Edric?" "In the gallery, at the auction house. I laughed when you walked in." "Yes." "I would like to ask your forgiveness." I considered him. I considered the room he had laughed in, and the women who had walked it before me, and the women who would walk it after me if no one with any standing said anything about it. And I considered, mostly, that he had ridden 12 men to a gate and broken Lady Vash's spine on a road 3 nights ago. I said, "You may ask, Edric." "I am asking, Luna. I will think about it." He looked, briefly, like a man who had been hit. Then he looked, more briefly, like a man who had recognised he was being teased. He bowed his head. "Thank you, Luna." "You are welcome, Edric. Do not laugh again." "No, Luna." He left. Roderick, who had been pretending not to listen, said, "You are going to be insufferable as Luna." "Yes." "Good." It is a year later, as I tell you this. I am writing this down in the King's Solar, at the desk that is now half mine, with a fire going and a winter storm coming over the ridge, and a small wolf in a basket by my feet, who is not yet old enough to argue. The Sable Temple was investigated by a tribunal Roderick raised the moment the snow cleared. The head priestess was removed and is in a mountain holding where she cannot sell any more children to debt houses she knows their enemies run. I have not gone to see her. I have not decided whether I will. The Glassmere auction house was broken. Lady Vasha did not survive the road. Her father declared the feud Roderick had told me about, and we ended it 3 months ago, in a way I will tell you about another night. The pendant sits on the desk in front of me. It is cool. It has been cool since the bond, and the silver blood that came up through me that night has settled into the kind of healer's gift the old women of the Sable March used to have, and I have already mended one rejection wound on a young woman the beater brought me from a southern pack, and her gratitude was the first time I cried since the night I walked into the gallery. I am not plain. I never was. The room laughed because the room was wrong. The room is, on average, wrong about most things. Tell me, if you have stayed with me to the end, where you were sitting when the beater laughed. Tell me what you noticed about Roderick before I did. Tell me which line you replayed. And if her voice is the kind of voice you want at the end of a long day, follow her home. There are more of us,